I'm Art Chang. My pronouns are he, him. I am sitting in my study in Brooklyn, New York. For those who may not be able to see me, I'm an Asian man with large gray glasses and short hair, and it's graying hair, if I might admit. And I'm a former Columbia technology professor, the board chair for the Coalition for Asian American Children and Families, the largest API coalition in New York State and actually in the United States, even though we serve only in New York State. And I'm a former mayoral candidate. So I'm really, really pleased to be here with my friend Ron Harris. It's been a couple of years since I've seen you, Ron, but it is really a pleasure, and I just want to thank you so much for being here. So if you like, why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself?
Well, thanks, Art, for the invitation. I wish we were reconnecting on better circumstances, of course, but it is certainly good to see you, and I appreciate you holding space for this conversation in Minneapolis. For those who haven't had the chance to meet, my name is Ron Harris, longtime colleague of Art's since 2020, where I was or at the time, I was the Chief Resilience Officer for the city of Minneapolis, helping to guide the city through multiple crises, including COVID and George Floyd's murder. Um, Today, I'm an entrepreneur. I am a senior advisor. I'm an organizer, thought leader, um, really working to make sense of these moments and working to help support on the front lines the best way that we can. And we'll talk more a little bit later in conversation about some of the efforts that we've been taking in Minneapolis to keep people safe.
Great. Thank you, Ron. So the way this came about was I, like a bunch of people, became very curious about what life was like really on the ground in Minneapolis. And I do want to make just a clarification. When we talk about Minneapolis, we're usually talking about Minneapolis, St. Paul, and some of the surrounding small cities as well. And so just want to make sure that when we mention Minneapolis, it's inclusive of those other places. But just a very quick chronology. How did we get here? And I think it's just so important to keep this in mind. So, um, June 2025, there were two assassinations. Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband John, and State Senator John Hoffman. In July, the next month, HR 1 passed, sending an unprecedented $170 billion in funding to fund DHS, ICE, and CBP, the largest non-defense military-like expenditure in US history and larger than the defense budgets of most countries. In September of 2025, and this is just crazy to think about 6 months ago, um, Kavanaugh, the Kavanaugh stop was created by Supreme Court Justice Brian Kavanaugh, who declared that a person an officer can have reasonable suspicion based on somebody's skin color, their occupation, where they work, and they don't need to have any evidence or necessarily even a warrant to be able to detain somebody. In December 2025, Operation Metro Surge begins. It's hard for me to imagine 3,000 heavily armed officers pouring into this relatively small area, vastly outnumbering the police force in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And in fact, the 3,000 is more than the police forces in the surrounding 11 counties. And if this were New York, and this was the proportionate response, this would have been 34,000 federal officers flooding New York City, which is equivalent to the entire New York City police force. In January 6th, you could have predicted it. Renee Good was killed. Um, January 15th, the ACLU sued to get ICE out. That's still being adjudicated. On January 24th, Alex Preddy was killed. We should discuss the difference between using the word killed and murdered. On January 30th, the journalists Don Lemon and Minnesotan journalist Georgia Fort were arrested for coverage of a church protest in Minnesota where the pastor is a officer in ICE. And then as of today, there are over 3,000 allegedly undocumented people arrested for there are bomb threats. Tonight, the partial federal shutdown ends. DHA funding will continue for 2 weeks, but then the negotiation is on what happens with DHS funding. No one's talking about abolishing ICE at this point. They're talking about just reducing the funding. And is this right? But also tonight, state caucuses across Minnesota are gathering to select Democratic and GOP nominees for governor to replace Tim Walz. And the the leaders of those caucuses are warning people that ICE might be present. So this is where we are today. Minneapolis, St. Paul's, about 750,000 people, about half white, about 20% Black, about 10% Latino, similar size Asian. Um, it is a place that is a lot smaller than New York or Los Angeles or many of the places that people are calling in from tonight, but it is like many, many, many cities across the country. So Ron, I wanted to point out, is a lifelong resident of Minneapolis. He has spent his career giving back to his community in so many ways. And so he's really the perfect person to speak. And where I'd like to start is actually with George Floyd. It happened in your backyard. You were the chief resilience officer. Um, Interesting to know what you did.
Well, thanks for providing the context for how we arrived to this moment. And I think it's important to start with George Floyd in many ways because what people are seeing today as it relates to the response from the people of my city to these occupations, uh, the rest of the country's kind of shocked by. Like, oh, Minneapolis, we didn't know you had it in you. We didn't know your game like that, right? But what's important for people to know that what we built during George Floyd's murder and the aftermath is actually being tapped into today. That
Hmm,
infrastructure
hmm,
has been laid, that the ground had been laid for what we're building upon today. So in 2020, if we can remember that far back with everything that's happened between 2020 and now 2026, when George Floyd was murdered in my city, if you all remember, there was a gruesome video that went around the world, went viral around the world. And because everyone was at home, staying home from COVID and things like that, we all had a front row seat to this murder. Um, but the Officer Derek Chauvin had his knee on the back of George Floyd's neck for 9 minutes and 46 seconds. And after he was killed, the first press release that came from the police department actually said that he had died from a medical emergency. So one, thank God that we actually have video, right? And we have video of the killings of the last 2 weeks in Minneapolis as well, because the narrative that was spun out back then is very similar to the narrative that's being spun right now of the people who are dead who can't defend themselves, but having their character attacked as if they were the ones who pulled the trigger or ended someone's life. So when this happened in 2020, of course, the world was not prepared for this. And uh, what we found in 2020 was there were organizations that really helped to lead that movement, particularly Black Lives Matter and racial justice groups that were affiliated with that. They were organizing all the protests and the marches. They were organizing a lot of the actions. They were doing a lot of the coordinating. And the world saw, right, my city burn in many ways. But what the world did not see was the ways that neighbors actually looked out for each other.
hmm,
Neighborhoods that had not actually received investment for and actually had been disinvested from for a very long time were now finding ways to come together to take care of them and their own. They started to develop communication signal groups and chats, right? And different communication protocols. They were, we saw people make makeshift ambulatory services because the streets were so messed up that 911 actually couldn't get into some of the blocks. And so people were turning their minivans, rushing people to the hospital if they needed to. We had people helping the elderly pick up their medication from the pharmacies because, one, because of COVID, and two, because it was hard to get around in the city at that time with all the chaos and frustration and confusion. And so we saw elements of community looking out for itself and for each other during that time in 2020. The big key there's a lot of key differences. One of the ones on the surface level is the level of anger that my city had towards our city government, our police department. And when you see that level of concentrated anger, um, we saw a little bit more chaos and I'd say a little bit more violence. Although for the most part, we had been pretty, the folks who are on the front lines have been pretty peaceful and pretty safe. But that was about racial justice, and it was about the people versus the cops. And it eventually became the people versus all of the systemic issues that marginalized communities actually experience. So I saw people marching not only for an end to police brutality and equality in the system, but they were also marching for $15 minimum wage and gay, queer, and trans rights and women's rights and things like that. So that movement, they piled on a lot into that movement, which I think was able to recruit a lot of people. So you fast forward to this movement, which is really exciting. It is not the people versus the city anymore. It is the community versus the federal government, unfortunately, the community versus ICE. And the difference between the movement in 2020 and the movement in 2026 is how decentralized this movement actually is. That there's no single leader of this movement today in Minneapolis. There's no single organization that is taking up the majority of the space or coordinating the majority of the actions. I'm literally seeing my neighbors who have never been a part of a protest, are not affiliated or connected to an organization, finding ways to just contribute because they're so distraught with what we're experiencing and what we're seeing. And I'll tell you what you all see on TV or what you all see on social media, it is actually worse here in the city, in the metro. People think that we're running around chasing ICE and putting ourselves in between ICE and the people. And there are some folks doing that for sure to help defend their neighbors. But the vast majority of folks aren't even trying to mess with ICE, are just living their lives day to day and interacting with ICE just by living their lives, just by going to the grocery store, just by driving down the street. My mom was driving, I think home from work, and ICE folks are looking through her window and different things like that. Just these intimidation tactics, and as a result of that, we just have regular folks finding ways to contribute. Regular folks recognizing that I have something of value. I'm pissed off. This should not be happening in my country. I don't know what to do. I'm just going to show up. And what we're showing the country is we know how to show up for each other. This is the model and the blueprint for how you fight back. And this, the last thing I'll say on this question is why Minnesota? Like, why is Minnesota the target of the largest deployment of federal agents in the history of our country? Why is Border Patrol and Immigration and Customs Enforcement have that many agents that this far away from the southern border? The way I'd answer that question is a couple of things. Number one, and I'll make it very political because I think it is very political. Minnesota is a symbol. Minnesota is a symbol for good governance, good education. It's a great place for workers. It's a great place for business. We have good healthcare outcomes. We have progressive policy. I would argue we're probably a center-left state, but we've passed a lot of progressive policy. A Democrat or a Republican has not won statewide in this state since 2006. We are a symbol for what good progress looks like. And Donald Trump, better than any politician I've ever come across, understands the power of symbolism. He is trying to make an example of Minnesota, that these policies actually don't work, that things are chaotic here. He's trying to rev us up because I think he's thinking about what happened in 2020 and he thinks we're going to tear up our own city. But he is dead wrong. He's messing with a group of people who choose to live in an environment where the wind gets to negative 40 degrees routinely every year. That's not a very smart bet, in my opinion.
Well, you've made that bet and then doubled down on that.
That's
So,
right.
and well, Minnesotans seem to have. I mean, there's this love that Minnesotans seem to have for Minnesota and St. Paul and Minneapolis, and maybe that comes from actually going through some of these experiences together.
It is. What we're finding is that you hear the quip about Minnesota nice. You got a state full of these nice people who are nice and kind and all this other stuff. And I think it's a misnomer and it's a misunderstanding. We are Minnesota tough, we're Minnesota bold, we're Minnesota strong. And in this moment, the gift that the federal government has given us is an opportunity to, one, double down on our identity. Will actually help us reveal our identity and double down on it. Number two, help us expand and widen the aperture of who we consider as Minnesotan. There are a lot of people with a lot of pride in Minnesota, right? That, there's a lot of things that make Minnesotans Minnesotans. Like all of us have a story or an example of having a shovel in the back of our trunk and seeing somebody else in a ditch and just jumping out and not knowing who they are and helping them to shovel them out. That is just a routine thing. I remember when I have growing up at a really big backyard, about 100 yards. It's like the size of a football field. And it was part of my job to mow that thing. And took a long time to mow. And I remember when my dad first got a riding mower, and I remember being like, "Oh yeah, I'm about to knock this out pretty quick," you know. And the first time I got on the riding mower, finished the backyard in a fraction of time that I would with a push mower. So I get inside and I'm like, "Hey," he's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm all done." I'm like, "Go take a look." He looks back there, it's all done. He goes to the back, looks, it's all done. He goes to the front and looks at other people's yards. I said, "No, you're not done. You got to go help those folks out because they don't have a riding mower." Right? Same thing with a snowblower. So my point is that that is part of our culture.
Mm,
This is not new. Crises have a way of revealing who we are
mm.
as opposed to changing who we are.
Right. So it sounds like you had the community infrastructure already there. Because
That's the biggest lesson of this moment.
the community fabric is actually the infrastructure. And so when you start to erode that community, and then you start to erode this sense of commonality, and we won't go in that direction, but that's it's an important point in places that are becoming less and less affordable. But I do want to have a question. I'll go right now to police. I want to go to the National Guard. So you talk about the sense of us versus them, Minnesotans against the federal government, against ICE, DHS, Border Patrol. What does that look like for a police officer or for a member of the National Guard? I mean, we see over here in social media and here in New York, we see these, moving images of National Guardsmen pouring hot chocolate for community members. And, we just go, there's a skeptic in us just goes, that can't be right. That can't be true. What is it really like?
Absolutely. First, it is a trip. It is a mind trip to step outside your front door and see roving vehicles of these plainclothes folks wearing masks, no badges, big guns, running around, literally snatching people off the street and throwing them in the back of a car. Or, there's images of them showing, walking up to a car with guns drawn because of legal observers and they don't want to be observed based on what they're doing. I mean, it really messes with you to see that. It messes with you to see images of businesses that you frequent, restaurants that you frequent, and I roll up to go get some tacos, and I don't know if the business is going to be open or closed.
Mm,
It's a trip to go to the Mexican grocery store that I go to every other weekend. Parking lots popping, grocery store is always full, lots of people in there. They have a hot bar in there, all that other stuff. And then they go there now where one or two workers are there. There are people outside standing guard to make sure ICE doesn't come in. There are very few people inside buying groceries. And so regular life is disrupted to the point of the police. I think that the police, particularly in Minneapolis, have a very unique opportunity, probably the best rebranding opportunity that's going to come their way for a long time.
mm,
And this is what I mean by that. There are upwards of 4,000 federal troops, federal agents deployed to my state right now.
wow.
The Minneapolis Police Department only has 600 police officers,
Yeah.
meaning if they were to, leave their post to go and support ICE agents while they're operating, conducting their business, the, the rest of the needs of the city are not going to be met. Community sees law enforcement as law enforcement, right? ICE, CBP, police, state troopers, it's all law enforcement. The police have to find a way to demonstrate that their original commitment, their priority commitment is to the taxpayers of the locality by which they work. They are not paid to support federal agents terrorizing folks and snatching them up. And so I think the opportunity for the police, and I've had conversations with current police chiefs, former police chiefs, police officers themselves, trying to kind of hammer home the point that, from my perspective, the presence of ICE agents in your city should offend you as a police officer because what they're really saying is that you are not equipped to do your job. You are not equipped to keep your city safe. We're going to deploy a bunch of untrained people. You did cadet academy, you did, months and months and months of training. These folks have done 6 weeks, but they're going to come up here and they're going to clean up your city while you can't. And so I think the police now run the risk if they are not demonstrating in such a way that they are standing with the people by which they are paid to do so. That at some point, ICE has to leave. They're going to leave at some point. Hopefully, it's soon, but I don't predict that it's going to be. But when they do, the officers are still going to have to live here.
Hmm.
And based on how they're able to show up right now, will determine whether all the hard work that we've done over the course of the last 6 years to improve police and community relations, if that all goes to waste in this moment.
Hmm. Oh, that's amazing. It's an amazing
I,
concept.
I have one more piece. I apologize.
Yeah.
It's also frustrating a bit, if I'm being honest, that there are a lot of people who are talking about this occupation and the ways that they are fearing for their lives and fearing for, walk around every day or worried about being apprehended by these agents in some way. And I've had to gently share with people that that's been the reality for Black, brown, and immigrants, Black folks, brown folks, and immigrants for our whole lives.
Yes.
The way that you shudder in fear when you see an ICE agent is a very similar sentiment that I have and had growing up seeing a police officer. Very same thing, right? Worrying that if something happens and I don't get it on film, would I be believed or not? Worried that a simple traffic stop may be the end of my life, right? And so I'm not saying, hey, haha, you get to now experience what we've experienced, but I am saying that with context that as afraid as people feel right now in Minneapolis and in other cities where there's been certainly not this level of occupation, but certainly ICE presence, is how your neighbors have been feeling for a very long time. And I'm glad that you have this sense of urgency. And let's find a way to keep this up as we get through this meeting.
Yeah. Well, you speak the truth. Been in Brooklyn for 40 years, and I've seen it. And I have to say that I have felt some of that, but not the way that you have. Um, I want to talk a little bit more about, drill down some more about the average person. And, here in New York, we got ice all over the place too, but not the same way it is in Minneapolis. We have, and I'll just kind of point out, our Asian American community. We have a significant number of undocumented people. We have a significant number of people who are here on visas. And we add to that, a language difference. And I know the same holds true for Asians and to some extent Hispanics in Minneapolis. And we know that parents are keeping their kids out of school. They're keeping them away from healthcare, any place where ICE might be waiting to snatch people. And so we worry about them and worry about their health care, mental, and it's a really challenging thing. And one of the most eerie things here is that calls to domestic violence services for those communities have dropped because
Hmm.
nobody wants to be exposed. And so, like when you are looking at some of the communities, in Minneapolis and the kids, how is school attendance? How are things like, vaccinations? How are, you mentioned the grocery stores, you know, um, are kids able to have, you know, some semblance of a normal life or something that looks very different?
I tear up thinking about the level of trauma that our kids are experiencing and have experienced since COVID. All the disruptions, all the abnormalcy, right? And certainly in this moment, I'm getting reports of schools with 40 to 50% less attendance, for example, literally 40 to 50% less attendance. Um, One, because parents, of course, are afraid for their kids. Two, because their kids feel afraid at school, where there are students who are threatening to call ICE on them,
Mm,
bullying them.
mm,
Where parents, we've seen already in Minneapolis and in the metro area, parents dropping off their kids, getting apprehended, dropping off their kid at school, or picking them up from school, or dropping them off and headed to work, right? So doing regular life things, a lot of folks are unable to do, and more folks are afraid to do. Nothing more American than dropping your kid off at school on your way to work, or going to the grocery store to get some food and make a meal for your family, or opening up your business for the morning and getting all the food for the lunch hour, right? I mean, Literally, I kid you not. I live in a diverse neighborhood, and the large economic corridors in my neighborhood are full of immigrant-owned businesses and restaurants. They are closed. They're not making any money. So the business owner's not making money. No one's showing up to shop there, and the workers aren't making any money. So this is impacting our economy. And so we hear these folks who are supporting ICE and supporting Trump and supporting these things, and like, I am fiscally conservative and small government and states' rights. It's like, well, this operation has ballooned the federal government and has ballooned the budget and is ruining the economy, right? When I leave my house every day for my whole life, I recite a little routine in my head: phone, wallet, keys, chapstick, every time, so I don't forget my stuff. That has now become phone, wallet, keys, chapstick, charge, extra battery, whistle, passport, because I was born and raised in this country. It doesn't matter. Here's something that people don't fully understand about what ICE is doing, which is why it makes it that much more dangerous. Number one, they actually have quotas. So it's just about a volume of people. Number two, they're not walking around with a list looking for specific people. They are going around just literally racially profiling based on skin tone and accent, and then apprehending them, dealing with them at the federal building when they've been detained, and then shipping them off to El Paso, Texas, whether or not they got the papers right. Sometimes they get it right, sometimes they don't. So there's no rhyme or reason to how they're doing this. It'd be one thing if they had a list of specific people and they're going after those specific. They're not. They're going after people and then running their names through a database to see whether or not they catch something. There was a report that came out recently that of the 70,000 people that have been detained by ICE so far in this administration, 92% of them have zero criminal record. So that's why regular people are nervous. Like I said, kids being bullied at school, people not being able to go to work, people not being able to drop their kids off at school. That's the daily reality for so many right now in my city.
Yeah, it's really kind of a living tragedy, and it's only been a few months. And so when you think
They
about
first got here in December. Now to put this in context, because this didn't just start in December. This is about rhetoric and narrative.
sure,
The federal government has been coming after Somali people in my state, 80+% of which are naturalized citizens. So that is the wrong population to go and try to get people undocumented. These are people who literally came over on Delta. They didn't sneak over, they were flown over, part of a refugee program in the 90s, as people were fleeing civil war in Somalia. But they've targeted them. Why? Because of Ilhan Omar, because the president hates Ilhan Omar. This is a very personal thing. This whole why Minnesota is very personal. He hates Tim Walz. He hates Ilhan Omar. He is convinced that he won the election here in 2024. I ran that campaign in 2024 for Kamala Harris. I know exactly what happened in that race. He did not win that race, right? But that rhetoric starts to, he's been going after us for so long. And now, not only has he deployed all these federal troops that we're paying for, by the way, through a tax break for the rich. So they cut our health care to fund ICE, and now we're dealing with ICE with reduced health care. He has withheld SNAP benefits from my state, has withheld Medicaid benefits from my state, and has said that they will not pull out the ICE agents until we turn over our voter rolls to the Attorney General's office.
right? It's blackmail.
Well, it's blackmail. So my point is that they're trying to choke us out. They're trying to do everything they can to choke us out, and I think they're trying to incite chaos and riot and all those things. The point, you have to look at this movement, or you have to look at their efforts through the lens of political theater. If it's through the lens of safety, you don't have people who are trained for 5 weeks and deploy them to a city with these aggressive, intimidating tactics. If it's about safety, you don't do that. If it's literally about safety, you're not gonna. It's literally about getting the worst of the worst. You're not picking up people at work, picking up people at school. I got friends who are nurses. I just talked to them yesterday. There are people who are not coming into the office to the hospital because ICE is camped out at hospitals.
Hmm.
People are not going to get them to pick up their medicines because ICE is camped out at convenience stores.
Hmm.
Like they're trying to shut down people from living their life. And what happens when you're restricted that much? Well, their bet is that we're going to cut up and we're going to act out, and then we're going to justify
Right.
the Insurrection Act, and then more federal now troops
Yep.
coming to our state. Except we're not taking a bait. For 2 consecutive Fridays, right? This past Friday and the Friday before, 100,000 people. did a participated in the general strike, did not go to work, did not buy anything, did not go to school, and met in the streets to march. 2 consecutive Fridays, 100,000 people apiece. Guess how many broken windows?
Zero.
Zero. No broken windows.
So
And so my point in saying all that is that,
go ahead.
go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, finish your point.
My point in saying that is that speaks to the level of resilience of my city and it speaks to the level of mobilizing to my city. But what's not been spoken of is the level of organizing, the level of long-term relationship building, the level of helping people discover their own power and helping to channel their contributions into making a difference on the ground. The pride that we have in our state, the pride that we have in each other, the pride that we have in being a Minnesotan.
So let's
It's almost like we have pride in not proving them right, you
right.
know?
Well, let's take that point because one of the things that my friend Brad Lander came back from his visit there and talked about the training of the communities. That this is not just something which happened accidentally, but that Minnesota had and Minneapolis residents conducted their own training sessions and built other infrastructure so they could actually know what to do, prevent violence, and all these other things. So say a little bit about that. Like who ran those? Who funded those? Who attended those? How did people know? How widespread was it?
We have to go back to even before George Floyd's murder. I don't know if you all remember when Philando Castile, a legal gun owner, was shot and killed in his own car. Or remember Jamar Clark, who was killed right outside of a police precinct. And organizers, myself included back then, occupied the police precinct for 18 straight days.
Hmm.
18 straight days of peace until white supremacists came and started shooting people, and then they had to shut it down. And so, like, we have a history of this. Minnesota was one of the first states to join the Civil War as part of the Union.
Hmm.
If you think about a lot of the civil rights policies that were passed in the 60s, the person that carried that work was Vice President Hubert H. Humphrey from Minnesota. The first civil rights code of ordinances came from Minneapolis, Minnesota, by Mayor Hubert H. Humphrey. My point is that we have a history of this. We have a history, and then again, I come from a state where we routinely have -20 to -40 degree weather in the wintertime. By nature, people have had to rely on each other to just survive this climate. We've had to rely on each other to share resources and things like that. We have we have history as a state of being a Lutheran population. So that's the context of the states. But even before George Floyd's murder and back to Philando Castile and Jamar Clark, there have been organizations who had been community organizing in between big national moments, right? So instead of waiting for a crisis, they go to community and say, what are some of your needs? What would you like to see for your neighborhood? What would you like to see for your city? Going to people who work multiple part-time jobs just to make ends meet, going to people who are seasonal workers or temp workers or the folks that we ignore in our society and helping them discover their own power and connecting them to trainings and resources. And so when something happens, we're not starting from scratch. We're not saying, oh, shoot, this happened. We got to come up with a training and get everybody ready. It's like, oh, shoot, something happened. Let's go call all those people that we've trained. Let's get them out there to get to work.
Hmm.
And there's so many that people look at that example and then they just follow and they join. So to answer your question more succinctly and specifically, we never stopped organizing after George Floyd was murdered. Even after Derek Chauvin was convicted on state and federal charges, even after the outlaw officers were convicted, even after we had made some reforms within our police department and our city writ large, even after we had changed some policies and procedures, we still kept organizing to the point where when Donald Trump won the election on November 5th, 2024, which was my birthday, unfortunately, uh, literally a week later, before Thanksgiving, they were already sending out emails and people were passing out flyers for um, uh, know your rights trainings and support your immigrant neighbor trainings. They were already getting ready because of the rhetoric that was being spit out there. So my point is, we were never starting from scratch. Now, when we think about who funded it, the city has funded a lot of things in the past, but a lot of this is our nonprofits who are, raising money, right? That's why the administration has come after a lot of these C3s because he's seeing the ways that we are doing a whole lot with a little bit of resource. That's what we do as a people, by the way. And so what we're showing in Minneapolis is what it looks like to be human. Does it look like to be a part of a community? At a time where what they're trying to do to us as the federal government is to separate us from each other, to make us uh, doom scroll, to make us feel despair, to make us feel alone, to make us forget that our strength actually comes from each other, from our community, from our neighbors, from each other. And instead, we're pushing back by saying, no, we know where our strength comes from. We know our values come from. We'll take all the smoke. We will outlast this. I was a little worried about sort of the waning, in any movement, right? You just start to see waning participation. But here's the beauty of it. This is not a race. Uh, no, this is not a sprint, nor is it a marathon. This is a relay.
Mm.
I got people out there 5, 6 days a week, and then they take a day off and somebody else slots in, right? It's like I learned this years ago about choirs. A choir can hold a tune for hours, right? Single note for hours. I'm like, how the heck can they do that? Like, that's a lot of lung capacity. They're able to do it because if someone gets tired, they step out, somebody else steps in and carries the note until they need respite and keep doing that. That is what we're doing in our city, and that's what we've been doing for the last 6, 7, 8 years.
Wow, that's beautiful. Um, what a metaphor. I'd like to turn to like, how are you keeping everyone safe? Targeted people, journalists, protesters, and I want to put this in the context of like success. I mean, one of the attendees asked a question about how does success get measured, and it's only been a few months. You've had this long trajectory in the past, but we have years to go of Trump's administration. So what does success mean? And, for maybe for each of these groups or just maybe, as a whole for Minneapolis and Minnesota.
It's a great question, and I think whoever you ask will answer it differently. I'll answer it from a couple of different perspectives. From the most obvious perspective, getting ICE out of here. Get out of here. We don't need you. You have actually made our city less safe. You've actually ruined people's lives. You're actually taking people's lives away. The conditions at the federal center where they're detaining people are abhorrent.
Mm,
Toilets are getting cleaned for days on end. Cells that are meant for 3 or 4 people having 18, 19, 20, 21 people in those things. There are sexual assaults happening to kids in those places, right? There are beatings that happen in those places to the point where people are getting sent to the hospital. Again, I have nurse friends who are like, people are coming in from the detention center with it feels like war injuries from
mm,
what they or torture injuries, I should say, from what they've been through, right? Um, so it's a scary question to try to answer what does success look like. It's number one, getting them hell out of here. I think number two, on a more positive note, success looks like while they're still here, we are sustaining our efforts. Here's an example of success.
mm,
If the resistance to this, if we were not winning, right? Because I think they expected us to capitulate, or they expected us to eventually cave, or they expected us to, burn up a bunch of stuff in our own city, and then they come in and try to whatever. If we were not winning, they would not be deploying more troops, or I should call them troops, more agents, thugs, I'm calling them. They would not be deploying more of them. They would not be sending Homan and Bovino and Nome and JD Vance and whoever else that keeps coming into town. They wouldn't be doing that. They wouldn't be lying about videos that we're seeing with our own eyes. They would not rush to demean the character of somebody that they killed. And if they were running this like any other business, like I said, 92% of the people that they've apprehended total in this country, in this administration, do not have a criminal record. If you were failing at your job 92% of the time, you'd be fired and you would not get more funding or more resources to keep doing that job. God forbid you kill someone on your job. You would expect to at least stay silent before jumping out to demean them, right? I mean, so like the standards by which they're operating are different than how we even live our own lives.
right.
There's a lower standard for them than we have for our own lives. And so winning looks like them getting out of the city. Winning also looks like, or success also looks like us finding a way to continue to be Minnesotan, continue to keep this up, and to continue to carry that note and to continue to pass the baton. As we get weary, somebody else steps up. Success also looks like other cities stepping up before you all become occupied. When I see the video clips from New York and from Boston and from cities in Maine and from Chicago and others chanting things like Minnesota showed us how to be brave, that buoys us. That gives us the wind beneath our sails to continue to keep going. Because here's the thing: When I get up every single morning, I certainly think about how am I going to help keep my city safe? How am I going to help get these people out of here? I'm also thinking about the medium and the long term. And I'm thinking about that how we are responding right now in Minnesota is not just a moment for Minnesota. This is a moment for the country. If we fall here, right, it makes it that much more likely for other cities and places to fall, and that much more likely for an authoritarian government to continue to take over. The beauty of it is that my community is not capitulating like the universities have, or the law firms have, or the media companies have, or the corporations have in many ways. We are demonstrating what it looks like to be brave and courageous. It's something else that might be controversial. We're also seeing the gaps in many ways of some of our public leaders,
Hmm.
right?
That's gonna be one of my next.
That yeah, there are folks who've I think done a good job, um, have done a good job, like Governor Walz, like Mayor Fry, and there are other folks who are just failing to meet the moment and have power, but are just sending strongly worded statements,
Hmm.
strongly worded letters. I saw something on Threads the other day that said something to the effect of what it feels like right now is that we are in a burning house and some of our elected officials are outside on the sidewalk saying, "Hey y'all, it's hot in there."
Hmm.
Yeah, we know it's hot.
Yeah.
How are you going to help us get out of there? And so this moment is showing the challenge for leadership right now to protect people while also avoiding random lawsuits from Trump and also, not setting a precedent for violence or anything like that.
Right. So I brought that up with a couple of Congress people, two of their faces in small gatherings, and um, they turned down with a question that actually shocked me. And I'm going to ask you that question. They asked, "Well, what should we do? What do you think they should do? What
If I
are
were in charge,
yeah?
if I were
What are
elected,
some of the representatives that are that you respect the most? What are they doing? I mean, if Minneapolis has this culture, some of your local electeds must be standing up in the right way.
again, I think they're in a tough spot. I also think the men don't know what to do.
Hmm.
And I think they should also, in some ways, share some of that emotional transparency of like, this is new to us, but our commitment is we're come hell or high water, they're gonna have to come through me if they're gonna attack our state and our people.
Hmm.
If I were elected, here's a couple of things I would do. Number one, every single day, every single morning, I'd have a camera up, I'd have a press conference, and I'd be updating people on what the heck is going on in my state. I'd be talking about how many people have been detained. I talk about how many raids. I show a heat map of where we see their activity. I'm also going to be the central command resource and information hub for the state. Every single evening, I'm going to do the same thing. Here's what we learned today. And by the way, here's what's not being talked about. Courts are releasing people every day. We got to talk about that too. Talk about the good stuff. Hey, today there's 17 people apprehended. We were able to get 16 of them out. We are able to connect them to these many lawyers. We still need, you're right, just like communicating to the people. That'd be the first thing I would do. The second thing I would do is I think people are leaders, and I understand why, are operating within the bounds of what's allowed, what's what's protocol, what's decorum. I'll give you an example. You all saw the image of the little boy Liam, the 4-year old who was taken, was used as bait to get his dad, and then they detained both of them and sent them to El Paso. And thank God he's now home as of yesterday. And the day after he left, there was a measles outbreak in that detention center. Now, while he was still there, if I were elected office, I'd be like, you know what? I'll be damned if a baby constituent of mine gets snatched up. I'm flying down to El Paso right now, and we are going to demand answers. And I will not leave that detention center until we get that boy home. Now, what does that serve, Ron? Right? What if they're not just going to hand them away because you showed up? But guess what that does serve? It demonstrates that as a leader, I am emotionally attuned with the people that I represent. That if they're afraid of something or they're scared of something or their sense of urgency is high, so is mine. I'm not disconnected from where they're at. Because right now, there's a lot of leaders who are emotionally disconnected from where we're at, which means they're not using their power the way that they could, which means they're sending us a signal in many ways of, oh, you're on your own. They don't mean this in that signal. I don't think they mean this in that signal, but I think that's the impact versus the intent. The impact of you having power and not pushing at every single possible lever possible to keep us safe because it's not within the realm or the rules or it's not within my powers. You got a platform, you got a voice. Like we are at a tipping point, and the midterm elections are coming up in November. So you can't come to my community and ask for support for me to vote for you in November if the leadership you're showing me today is a reflection of the leadership you're going to show me tomorrow. I need you to show up in the present for me to support you in the future. And there are a lot of folks who are failing to meet that moment. So I think to answer your question, I'd be far more emotionally connected to the people on the receiving end of this. I would be far more convening of information and communicative about what's going on. I would be, here's the last thing I'll say on this. I took a course on leadership, on public narrative, at Harvard a few years ago. And the definition of leadership in that course is something that I've held with me ever since, which is leadership is accepting the responsibility of enabling agency during times of disruption or uncertainty. Your job as a leader is to make sure that people have more agency, or that you help facilitate them finding their agency. And so if I'm elected, I am going to use my perch, my powers, my bully pulpit, my voice, my face, my body to help enable other people's sense of agency. Part of how you enable agency is a level of emotional connection and transparency. Part of how you disable agency is make people feel crazy about being as scared as they are.
Well, we need you.
Policies, right? I'd be
We need you
talking
running for
about
office.
I'd be talking about eviction moratoriums, Art. Like if people aren't able to go to work or earn a paycheck, I would put a pause on all evictions right now in the state. I can't expect you to go to work while you risk being killed or detained or shipped off to El Paso or some other country you may have never even been from. We're going to cut that, right? I mean, there are policies that we can put into place. I would I would extend what the public schools did, right? They until February 12th, they've allowed for remote school, remote learning. I would extend that through the rest of the school year, right? Like there are actions that we can take that say, you know what, safety comes first, uh, and these actions are going to buy us time to continue the fight.
Those are powerful words and powerful recommendations. I mean, they don't apply just to Minneapolis and Minnesota, they apply to the entire country. In fact, they apply to what democracy is supposed to be all about. And, you know, those are inspiring words. Thank
I'll
you.
give you a more radical one. If they're going to, sorry, I'm preaching now. If they're going to starve my state, the hungriest amongst us, from their SNAP benefits, from their Medicaid, from other federal resources that we pay, I would call for we're not paying federal taxes because Minnesota is a state that subsidizes the other parts of the country. We pay more in taxes than we get back in aid, in resources and support. And I'm proud that we are that. But if you're going to try to choke us out, then you're not going to use our money and use our resources to do so. We're not paying federal taxes. Now what? Right? I mean, like that. In my opinion, these are the ways that you fight back because what we're up against, they're not playing by the rules that we're playing by. They're not even playing the same game that we're playing. Democracy comes before decorum. People's safety comes before the rules and procedure. That's the posture that I'm looking for out of our leaders.
Amen. 100%. Um, got only a few more minutes. So let me turn to some questions from some of the attendees here. By the way, you've held the attention of this audience in a very consistent way, and so that's incredible. Um, so Claire asks, let's talk about tech, both tech on the offensive side and tech on the defensive side. And we have Signal on the defensive side, and on the offensive side, Kristi Noem just said, well, we're going to give every officer body cams, but body cams are a double-edged sword. It's not necessarily about safety. It's not necessarily about capturing the truth. It's also about capturing people's faces and facial recognition. So just would love to hear from you a little bit about the tech on this and what you think needs to happen.
I think it's ridiculous that I want to say Joe Biden passed a rule for DHS agents to wear body cams. Donald Trump came and took that away, and now they're re-implementing it. to your point, not for safety or to get the truth out, but for increased surveillance. And I would argue, not even argue, I would state plainly for its B-roll and content for propaganda. If you all remember, the agent that murdered, I'll say killed until we get a conviction. The agent that killed Nay Good shot her 3 times in the face as she was trying to get away, out of their way. He had his cell phone in his hand first. He moved it from his right hand to his left hand, kept the video going, and then pulled out his gun. And that's when he killed her. And we found out that was because there was either an order or suggestion, I'm not certain, for ICE agents to be capturing film. And they're using that to spin a narrative and tell a story about how violent Minneapolis is or any other community or how these animals, these violent animals, that's what they're trying to do. I think they're gonna do the same thing with these body cams. Not only with those body cams, they have an app, and I can't think of what it's called, but it's facial recognition.
Right.
And there was an example. There was a story of a woman just 3 or 4 days ago, a white woman, who was a legal observer, a trained legal observer, which is within our First Amendment right. And the agent took a picture of her on the app. 4 or 5 days later, she tries to go to the airport and use TSA PreCheck and global entry, and her global entry and TSA PreCheck was revoked. That is terrifying.
Right.
That you can just take my picture, and all of a sudden, now you're impacting my ability to get around the country, get around the world with pre-check and things like that. On the defensive side for us, of course, we have messaging encrypted apps. A friend of mine named Jazz Hampton, he was a candidate for mayor of Minneapolis this past cycle and wasn't successful. Is an entrepreneur and a lawyer and had built an app before he ran called Turn Signal, which actually came after George Floyd was murdered and Philando Castile were murdered, where if I have this app and I get pulled over by the police, I open up the app and immediately starts recording, and it pulls up a lawyer that I can talk to, or the lawyer that can talk to the officer as another advocate. Well, what they've done now recently is they've expanded that to also include to add immigration attorneys on there. So if you need an immigration attorney or you get apprehended, you'll be able to get one in right away. So those are just two tech options that we have. But um, I think in these moments of disruption, particularly if we do our jobs of enabling people's agency and helping them find a way to contribute their value to the movement, we're going to get ideas like that. We're going to get apps. We're going to get better leaders. We're going to get better ways of communicating. And the goal, in my mind, is not to just deploy these things during emergency response, but to implement them in our stabilization and eventually our adaptive recovery as we create a new civil society. That we've demonstrated how important it is for us to lean on each other and how important it is to share our resources and how important it is to look after each other. So we can find ways to retain this neighborliness even after these agents are gone. That's the real metric of success.
Great. Can you name, for everyone's benefit, name those two apps?
Signal is the messaging encryption app, and Turn Signal is actually the name of the app that I mentioned.
Terrific. Okay, we'll look those up. So I'm going to wrap with one final question, and then a couple of messages for everybody afterwards. This question comes from my really good friend Brad Lander, who was the New York City controller, who was runner-up in the mayoral race. He is running for Congress right now in my district, and he was just spent several days in Minneapolis and just has come back. So he has a question about sustainability, and it says everyone is focused on rapid response when our attention is drawn there by social media and other media. But when you go back to normal, when you go back to this adaptive period that you talk about, right, how do we build longer term practices, change in infrastructure? And you have the answers right there in Minneapolis because you've done that in the past. What would your recommendations be for New York and Chicago and Los Angeles and Boston and everywhere around the country, looking at Minneapolis and going, well, this is really our future?
Get ready now. Build those relationships now. I got advice early on in my career that said, build the network before you need it, right? It's very similar. Start to have neighbors connecting with each other, getting to know each other before we actually have to press that button. Start making sure that you do your know your rights trainings now. You do your, you know, anti-ICE trainings now and protect your immigrant friends and family now, right? You make sure that if there are proactive policies, that you start advocating for those things in local government. And don't look at these measures as just stopping the emergency. Look at them as planting the seeds for the sort of society that we're trying to shape. And let's say you do all those things and ICE actually doesn't occupy your city. Well, guess what? You've made a better city anyway, right? Like these activities will make you better anyway, so we might as well get on the path of building long-term community resilience now. What was beautiful about George Floyd, the response to George Floyd's murder, were that neighborhoods and communities were responding in such a way that far exceeded the level of investment that had happened in that community. So we started to learn our lesson. Let's just find ways to invest now, invest now, invest now. And we've been investing as a community in each other and in these organizations and in people for a rainy day. And that rainy day hit, and multiple rainy days kept hitting. And we demonstrated that we're not starting from scratch, right? So start to build this identity now in your cities. Like we have fully owned, like I said, this identity of Minnesota strong. What does it mean to be Minnesotan? If I'm in Chicago, start to define what does it mean to be a Chicagoan? Well, a Chicagoan is are deeply loyal because of their sports, right? Like I mean, had a bunch of winning in a long time. So I'm originally from Chicago, so I can say that I'm a big Bears fan. But also Chicagoans, we fight hard and we look after each other, right? Like the narrative is just as important as the tactics are. The narrative is actually the thing that's sustaining us because in our minds, we're like, yeah, but we're Minnesotans and we're not going to stand for this. We're Minnesotans. We're not going to allow the federal government to divide us. We're Minnesotans. We're not going to pit us against our neighbors or have us out our immigrant friends and family. We're Minnesotans, so we're going to continue to spend money in immigrant-owned businesses. Whether or not they're open, we're going to buy stuff on DoorDash, even if they're not open, because we know the money gets over there. We're Minnesotans, and yeah, we're known for being Minnesota nice, but we're tough as shit with the winter and dealing with these truth. Right? I mean, so build this identity of who we are, because that's actually what we're going to tap into in our hardest moments.
That's
I
great.
think that is the single most important thing that we're holding on to is who we are as Minnesotans.
Yes. Well, at this moment, I would say that the entire world are Minnesotans. We're with you.
That
Um,
means a lot.
It is true. We see that everywhere. So for the folks who are watching and who see the recordings, a couple of just very practical questions. What can people do to help? Like, what are the one or two things? I'm going to be posting a list on my website, standwithminnesota.com, which has a very good set of resources. And thanks to Cheryl for pointing that out for me. What can people do?
Great question. First, I'm glad you shared the resource of Stand in Minnesota. That is a donation page with all sorts of organizations where you can send some money. That'll be the biggest thing right now. We need people. We need people who are able to support emergency rent assistance, other forms of mutual aid like carpooling and things like that, buying groceries and being able to deliver those things, sending money so that we can do cash mobs to help keep these businesses afloat. That website will point you into a lot of directions in terms of contributing your money. That's number one. Number two is continue to use your voice online. Continue to use your voice in the public because the more of us that are talking about a thing that's wrong, the harder it is for them to keep doing that wrong thing. And there are days I talk to my parents about this. There are days I wake up in the morning and I feel crazy with things going on. I'm like, how is this happening? Right? Am I the only one that thinks this is nuts? But then I'll go online and see someone from another city saying, this is nuts. This shouldn't be happening. This is not normal. It's like, okay, whew, I'm not losing it. There are other people out there who also believe that. Number three, find ways to demonstrate in your own communities because we see those things. And not only do we see them, the federal government sees those things. And they're going to think twice about invading other cities, knowing that we are laying out a blueprint and a model here at home for everybody else to follow. I think the last and final, not shouldn't say last and final, but the last thing I'll say on this is develop a commitment to helping your neighbors find their sense of self-agency because they're going to need it in a major way, right? And make sure that you go and vote in these elections in November. Voting's not going to save everything. We have to be honest about that. But we're also not going to create the sort of future that we want without voting. And I'd argue Challenge your elected officials to do more than say, well, we're better than the other guy.
Yep.
Challenge your elected officials and say to do more than saying a bad thing is a bad thing. We know that. What are you going to do to help us? Keep pushing them on that so that again, I'm not saying, we're trying to embarrass them. I am saying we're trying to encourage them to be more courageous. And if they're looking for courage or bravery or examples of it, tell them to come look in Minnesota because we are showing as a people what it looks like to be brave, what it looks like to be courageous, what it looks like to figure it out in real time.
So I'll end with the statement, we are all Minnesotans.
We're all
And
Minnesotans.
as Minnesotans, we should all be reading the Minneapolis Star Tribune because that's how you keep up with what's happening in Minneapolis in a way that major media doesn't cover elsewhere. And so it's really the only way to get a balanced picture of what's happening, in my perspective.
And we
Well,
have
like I
independent
said,
journalists as well that are worth following as well, right? Like Georgia Fort, who was
yes,
arrested by the federal government recently and was just released just for doing her job as a reporter. Make sure you look at the independent journalists. Make sure you share as much as you can these resources and this information so people can see what's going on. Because here's the other piece: there are people out there who live in a completely different world because of their news consumption.
right.
They're not seeing any of this stuff. They're still of the opinion that, well, if they would have just complied, they would be safe. Or, the ICE agents are just trying to get rid of the pedophiles and the criminals. Why aren't you? It's like that's not what's happening. And so the more we share, the more we talk, the more we can start to penetrate some of that. And I'm seeing some people who are diehard red Republican supporters who are like, this is enough. We actually can't stand for this anymore, just because of the sheer exposure of this. So these are all the things that you can do right now that will both directly and indirectly help us and will certainly help you in your city as well.
All right, Ron Harris, this is an amazing conversation. It's a privilege for me to be part of this. And so I want to say thank you very much from the bottom of my heart for making the time and making the space to do this. And who knows, things will keep progressing and maybe we'll have another one in a couple of weeks. If you wake up in the morning and you're crazy, you need someone to talk to, we'll just pull up Zoom and we'll start recording.
Thanks so much for the invitation. Thanks everybody for joining. Appreciate you sticking around and for standing with Minnesota. It means the world to us. Thank you.
Okay. Good night. Be safe.